Okay, I'll start with a basic categorization of movements as functions. So in any art we can practice for any purpose, be it fighting, healing, building, whatnot, you'll find recurrence of the same principles applying under different guises or shapes and with specific terms used for them in all the specific applications or fields of applications. The basic framework I'll propose is that movement is communication, and communication, meaning the process of making something common, has three basic directions. First direction will be reception. Something is incoming and something makes way and makes room to receive it. End of the reception, the total energy of the system is back to zero. You're in balance. The opposite of reception would be emission. So this would be a fast emission, but we call it a throw. In general times, you throw a punch, you throw a ball, but it's the exact same thing as a push with the sole difference of the time of transmission. So if it's very fast, we call it a throw. And if it's a throw would be used if it's fast and you have a gap in between. But basically there's no difference between impact and push. Impact is fast transmission, and what we call a push is a slow transmission of pressure. So this would be our first two principles. Reception, in principle, yielding, receiving, emission, active principle, throwing, jumping if it's on a vertical plane, many things related. In between you'll find all sorts of changing of a incoming vector force that we'll call deflection. And deflections can be going upwards and forward, completely upwards, downwards. You could even find deflections backwards, which would be different from reception is yielding under the pressure of the incoming force, while deflection would be adding more force or following in the same direction. And from these three basic principles, you'll have millions of potential applications. The first game will be to link the functions. So for now, the two functions, emission, reception, with three different categories. First one being shapes. You take a hollow object to fill it, to empty it, to refill it. You take a full, say, convex object. So this would be a protruding convex part that can be used to invade. This would be a concave hollow part that can be used to receive. If I put this tuning fork like this, it will look like a glass. If I put it like this, it could be used as anything from a nail, like any contendant object. So it's concentrating two pathways into one. The third principle that we can find very directly is the deflection is a change of movement, and you'd find something called transformation, which would be a change of shape. So the interaction between the incoming force and the resisting force or interacting force could create a change of shape in the object, which at a very smaller scale you'll find all the time anyway. So right now, let's tie it back. Receive, emit, deflect, transform. Now this principle can be used with any part of the body at whatever scale. So say a finger receives horizontally like this and emits like this. The receiving shape is concave and the emitting shape is convex. If we go deeper, we'll find that the receiving shape is congruent. So the actual shape that allows for reception is a hollow that fits completely the incoming shape, the incoming matter. So I can have a hollow shape here, but this hollow shape is based on emptiness surrounded by fullness. If the emptiness is not sized to receive the incoming force, it won't matter. What will matter is these two convex shapes that will oppose it. Well, the same would apply, this is completely obvious with objects, although oftentimes with the use of one's body. What seems completely obvious is forgotten very fast. So let's see how this changing shape principle will apply to all parts of the body. So I can receive like this, emit like this. I can receive like so, emit like so. Let's see. Reception, creating a valley, creating a hollow. Emission, creating a hill. It's pretty hard to see with my skills at filmmaking, but the highest point of the hill you're shaping or you're drawing there with your body, the highest point should be the contact point. Same goes for the reception. If it touches the middle of my palm, reception should be a receding of the contact point relative to all the rest of the end. If not, if I hollow out this but bring the ends, like the fingers, even more backwards, then it starts the deflection towards the fingers. Same would apply, it's much more simple to understand. If you picture water dropping from the sky, it will go to the lowest point of your pond or your lake. If there's a point even lower, it will go towards this point. So this is very commonly found, especially in emission. You want to hit or throw from the crease of your elbow, but you bring the end so far away back that the shoulder goes forward. So now most of the energy will be brought towards the shoulder for emission. For reception, the same would occur if I do not, while this is receding, say that the end is receding at the same time. So if this goes like this, part of the energy would be deflected towards the ends. So the same principle is applied in all sports, basically in all activities. If it's soccer, you'd find. So this is the hollowing of the chest upon receiving a balloon, and that drops the ball down. If I go like this, I bump the ball forward. And same for juggling, like you receive. So another way of seeing reception is static reception is holding something. In a hollow. Now if I bump it, even the word bump relates to the shape that I'm creating. I bump it, it goes in the direction. And here again, if I can, the contact point should be the one guiding directly. If not, you end up with all the things that happen when we try to juggle. Say, I throw it like this, but this goes higher, and this is a bit down, so the direction would be deflected this way. So, game of shapes. Hollow, full. If you use it on flat parts of your body, it seems impossible to create a hollow, but you have articulated parts elsewhere, mostly your hands, like the extremities. So you can receive this way, creating a hollow shape in between your shoulder and the tip of your fingers, and creating a heel shape the opposite way. So this obviously you find a lot in all the internal martial arts, and like all this play, deflecting, emitting, receiving. The emission is not always shown like full force due to other principles we'll see elsewhere, like moving energy. But the basic principle would still apply. Any part of your body can create a hollow. And the concept of the hollow is just to increase emptiness, make more empty space, so that fullness can be received. So for instance, if I receive a punch or a ball here, any fullness, any dense matter that I leave here will create an opposition. So I have two choices. First one, remove as much of the head as possible, which would basically be done in a static movement. Like if this stays static, I'm basically drawing the shape of the ball, drawing the contour of the ball. I could draw it in many different ways, like draw it downwards and sideways. If it's a fast movement, you would have a short time to evade, so the idea would be you'd go for the easiest and fastest option. The same would apply here. Like reception, so what I show here is the only way to sort of receive a blow at the head by creating this shape in between the head and the body. But it's more, it's not really something that we could call reception if you evade contact, which is what I do with your head, obviously. So if you do evade contact, oftentimes we call it evasion, or we call it dodging. So dodging is basically removing a contact point. You make sure you're nowhere. Ball goes forward, I go sideways, I dodged. The ball goes forward, I go at the same speed, backwards. I'm still dodging. I'm avoiding contact. Reception means that both systems will meet, interact, and as an issue of interaction at the end, there's no change in the system. No change. Well, let's go back. There's change in space. There's change in shapes, but the system, receiving system, is not broken. So that's strictly speaking. If you use the term receive, one could say that you received a bullet. So in the end, you have two choices. Either the shape will be created by the incoming force on something that's static or going the other direction. So if this is my leg and this is a metal beam or something meeting it in an accident, eventually my leg will be like this, one way or another. The question is just, will it be done voluntarily with parts of the body that can take it, or will it be done involuntarily by the incoming force? And then it will break the structure. So let's go back. This movement, emission, reception. You can find in basketball as dribbling, or as throwing if one uses the hand, which is not possibly the case, as we'll see. Like all the rest of the body could throw, and the hand have a minimal movement. But if one throws using only the hand, then you'll have to have the greatest difference in potential. So this difference in potential means that something can change. So if you go from fully convex to fully concave, in between you have a lot of potentiality for change. If you go from flat to fully convex, you have half of the full spectrum. But if you go from very concave to, the shape would not match here, very concave here to very convex here, creates a lot of movement. The more difference in potential, the more tension you would have in electricity. So it's always this picture of power being generated like a waterfall. So you'd have the amount of water being carried, you'd have the rate at which it's carried, and then you'd have the high difference between the point of emission and point of reception. And the time. The time would give the slope of a waterfall. The amount of current could be the intensity, and the difference in potential of falling and potential of rising would be given by the height, tension. In electricity, potential difference in the English applications of the word. Tension is used in French. So in between these things, we can see a couple of things happen. If you just have a change in shape, I can change the shape in two ways. I can recede at the point of contact, which will give a complete reception. But I can also create the exact same shape by bringing forward both extremities. And there, although the shape seems the same, the dynamic of the movement is not. I create a vector force of both extremities forward, and this vector force will go against the direction of the force. So that brings us to the second dimension, second category of movement, which we'll call direction and movement. So reception there would be linked to anything that will follow the direction of incoming force. So I can receive by just letting the energy of a throw dissipate without touching. If I go far enough, eventually it will stop. Same if I do not change at all the shape. I can have a concave shape, so a shape that would be fit for receiving, but my direction is forward against the movement of the incoming force. And there we do not see a reception. We have a noise that signals energy being dissipated into the shock. Same if it's flat, and stronger if it's two convex shape against each other. Picture two cars coming towards each other. They bump into each other. So this direction would be going against for emission. You can develop power in strike just by hitting without changing the relative position of any part of the body. You just walk towards someone who's running towards you, and any part of your body hits, and it will be felt as a strike. Similarly, if someone is coming towards you and you just move at the same speed backwards, it will be felt as a reception. Especially a complete reception would be that the movement stops at one point because there's no energy left. Otherwise it will be fleeing away, which is the same principle. And the last one that we saw before, which was the deflection, we already mentioned it into the concept of dodging. Incoming force is coming, I'm not running away back, I'm not going against it forward, so I can go upwards, downwards, sideways. I can draw it, like follow the shape in whichever direction. For as long as there's no transmission of force, I'm dodging, which means in the categories I use, I'm deflecting the direction. Transformation of movement could be addressed too, but I won't do it here. So now the last category I wanted to address is density. So what is density? In the most basic sense of the word, it's the relative proportion of emptiness and fullness. So my fingers are widespread, there's a lot of emptiness and there's some fullness. Some things can go through and some things will bump. The more widespread, the more emptiness, the more things can go through, and the bigger the things. It's like the size of a space in a net. Now the tighter things are joined together, the smaller the hollows. An object this size will meet only fullness. If I find an object which is the size of these small holes, then it would go through. If I find an object that's the size of the space in between my pores, it could go through too. So say oxygen atoms or air basically can go through some of the pores into the skin. And what guides now the movement is what's called pressure. And pressure is basically means to push. So the entire idea of pressure guides the complete framework of movement related to density. And the idea is amazingly simple, although it's disguised with a complex word. So you have pushes, the strongest push wins. You have two masses of air, one has more pressure than the other. It will push away this one. The one that has lower pressure will be called depression, which would be less pressure. The one with more pressure could be called other pressure, surpression in French. But say in specific terms it's called anticyclone in French meteorology. But the concept still is exactly the same. So now how do we relate it to the use of the body? So you put your hands on any part of your body and then you tighten the muscle fibers as strongly as you can. So you'll see if I do it here, if I make my jaw and my cheeks as loose and relaxed as we can, you can see a hollow shape being created. If I tighten, apart from making weird faces, you can see that something is pushed. It's easier to see maybe on the end. So I'll try not to change the shape. The shape goes from straight to straighter. And the only thing that changes is density. If I change completely only density, then it makes a very small move. Although on the body maybe you'd see something bigger. So I push this into my body, and now I contract. If I contract fast especially, you see this being pushed away. It's pushed away because the pressure I apply is less than the internal pressure created. So when I increase the density of the body by contraction, it's pushed away. There's actually two ways of increasing density. One is by bringing all things together at the center. It's called contraction. I use it not in the anatomical sense, but in the movement sense. You have a center, all forces are coming towards the center. Or you have the capital, all inhabitants are coming towards this capital. This is what I call contraction. If, on the contrary, all inhabitants are leaving the center towards the periphery, or spreading over a distance, that's what I call tension, extension. Like tension means you separate 2 points together. So now I can repel using density by increasing density, which is what you learn in most of the art styles. Like karate for kime, the basic shape, basic form of it would be like this. Same for boxing, you tighten your core, and it makes a lot of sense. There's no right or wrong there. So now the other way of actually increasing pressure is to stretch. So the stretching principle will be to increase surface tension. To actually increase it sufficiently, you need internal pressure that's sufficient. But so the main difference would be contracting, I increase. So if I contract like this, I push. This will increase the internal pressure. Once the internal pressure is sufficient, it pushes away like the membrane surface area. Well, the other direction would be if I stretch the skin, I increase surface tension. The surface tension backed by internal pressure is sufficient, or if the push is more than the incoming push, it will go in the other direction. So now this pressure would go like this, dealing with density. I can decrease density. I tighten and then I release. It's hard to see here. Tight, not so tight. It's actually easy to feel, very difficult to see because the movement is much smaller. So when I show it most of the time, you'll see a change in direction also and in shape. But basically what you can do now with these three principles, change shapes. The shape that's created to receive will be created by letting the receiving point recede following the direction, the vector force, incoming vector force. And the three parameters for full reception will be change of shape, backwards direction or direction following the incoming force, and hollowing, emptying. I create more space at a smaller scale inside the end. The reverse will be, so I create more emptiness so that I have more space to fill it. The reverse for emission, if it's a push, I go opposite direction from the center of the movement, so A would be the center of my hand, away, filling up the shape, so going from concave to convex, or if flexibility is not sufficient, from concave to flat, and then going against the movement of the incoming force. All these things are used all the time. Only problem is they're used in specialized area. So if you use them in volleyball, maybe you cannot use them in martial arts, or if you use them in martial arts, maybe you cannot use them in parkour. But their principles, they would basically be found anywhere. If you go towards healing arts, or say whatever you do, massage, same thing. At first you can play. That's what you'll do at first. You'll use increased density to go in, which is not very pleasant, so it's not the best way to keep doing it, but it's what one does at first. You invade the territory of the person in front. and then you push towards if you want to go in. You recede and go back and take a more hollow shape when you want to extract something. Putting pressure in, taking energy away, or taking the tissues, the flesh or the skin away from something it adheres to. And then the other directions would be deflections. And these deflections will combine. So if we go back to the cosmology of movement that we find in esotericism, in the beginning is nothing, and then there's something out of nothing. This something is represented as a dot. So it's zero-dimensional space. Zero-dimensional because there's no frame of reference. There's only one point considered with no... The background is different, but the background is indefinite. So now if I take 2 points, they are each other's point of reference. So they can move relative to each other in many different ways. And they can go... So see, we'd get the idea that they can come closer, but this would not really be the case. Before you have free objects, let's see, I take now you have free bodies. So now I can see these two coming together because I have a reference point. I can see the distance in between this one and this one. And even the idea of distance cannot exist before you have a free reference points. Two would only move relative to each other. They create each other, give birth to each other, but they cannot really be measured against each other because there's no meeting point. So this meeting point, this idea of a third that allows for comparison of two segments. So when we get the idea, if I bring these together, you'll say that they're coming closer. But you can say this because you have this reference point in the past. You have this state, and now you have another state. So this reference point in the past is your third object. If I have only these two things, these two objects cannot compare with each other. Although I can compare one state with another state. But I can compare it only if I have a frame of reference. We're swimming in the frame of reference that we call space, which is the actualization of emptiness. So it's relative emptiness in the manifested world. So this space exists because we project our reference points everywhere. So from the reference point of my body, I can go forward, backwards, sideways, the other side, up, down, and all combinations hereof. So now from this idea, this small point, once I create a frame of reference with 4 directions and 8 directions and 64 directions or whatnot, this can go up, down, front, back, side, diagonal. And then once I've used up all the linear movements, I can change the shape of the movement. It can go sideways in an arc, a curved line. It can go sideways in a double curve, which will create the first wave. It could go into any sort of jagged lines, like thunder-like patterns or whatnot, and then many others. So you picture the shapes we gave to receive or emit. If you join them together, you'll get this shape, yin-yang shape, the central joining of yin and yang in the Tai Chi 2 circle. So this shape is found also in reception. You can receive something and deflect it downwards, or deflect it sideways. So it starts with a linear motion and it's received via linear motion, but if the movement is like this, reception will follow. You do not receive a whipping motion the same way you receive a linear motion. The same would apply for deflection or for dodging. So now we have 3 categories: shapes, movements or directions, and densities. And in these 3 categories we have 3 different states: concave, convex, flat. I've not broached upon the flat aspect. So flat would be an in-between in the shapes between convex emitting. So convex is emitting at the top. If you're anywhere along the sides of a mountain, so here raindrops would just be repelled and bumped upon the peak, and then they'd start to be deflected downwards. The same would apply for the wedge principle, where you apply a triangle forward. The front point will cleave the incoming flow if the pressure is stronger, and then the flow will be deflected sideways. So it's very common practice in martial arts using the cleaving principle. So now what does the flat do? So basically, for now we've seen static shapes, but it must be said that although a hollow shape has the potentiality to receive due to its form, and later to store or to protect, its main power lies not into a state of being, but into the ability to change. So it's not as important for reception to be hollow or to be empty as it is to be able to hollow out as a verb, as an actual action, or to fill up when you're emitting, and to empty or relax as opposed to being hollow. And the same would apply for the same would not really apply for movements, because movements are changed. So movements are included into this category. They are being changed. But in the same way, this change too can be static or inertial. It can stay the same. If a vector force is coming, I'm going backwards. The vector force is changing speed, but not me. I'll get hit. So in this way, even the movement part, the direction part, would include the fact of being able to match or change relation, increase space or reduce space, change angles. So this is not so much the being that gives power, it's the difference in potentials, the ability to create and manifest change in a relation, in a communication or co-creation with the incoming force. So now, the flat part, if I want to draw something flat, if I do it like in one dimension, I stretch a string. If I want to do it on a plane, I'll stretch in two directions, sideways and front and back at the same time. That's what I would do to actually stretch the fabric of a pullover. I need forces sideways, but if I want to make it completely flat, I would need to pull it back and forth too. So when you do a flat surface, you're spreading the point of impact and you're distributing the amount of energy over a wider area. That's what we see with incoming rays of the sun. The seasons are not due to the actual distance with the sun on a regular basis. They're due to the concentration of rays over a smaller or wider distance. And this is based on the curvature. So this is fairly simple too, although it's maybe not so simple to see it. At 90-degree angle, there's the smaller area of contact. So rays or pressure will be more concentrated and the vector force will go directly in. The opposite would be nigh parallel. If rays of the sun are parallel or even tangential here, so this is a curved surface, and if it touch just one point and then go away, there's barely any interaction. If they're parallel, there wouldn't be any interaction, or any friction at least, any contact. So what happens when you create, you spread your hand upon the incoming force here. It's the same as stretching. One aspect is you increase density by stretching the fabric, like you augment the tensional surface tension. But at the same time, what happens is you're giving directions for the energy. You're deflecting. So if I go only upwards, you'd see a very, very small move into my middle finger. If I go downwards, same. Make it quite big so that it can be seen. I stretch towards my wrist and you see a small deflection. The same would apply if I stretch sideways. It's much harder to see. So if maybe easier to see here. I touch here and I stretch sideways. You see the pressure being deflected. So these are different aspects, but one of the big aspects here is doing so. So this would concentrate the pressure on a smaller and smaller point. And what I'm doing is I'm increasing the surface as though it's not pushing just this point. I'm spreading and distributing the pressure on a wider area. So this is what you get in elastic systems, where the links between fabrics and materials will distribute the pressure widely. So it's basically social support from all your surrounding groups, distributing the pressure equally or more or less equally over a wide area. So this is very, very useful for many applications too, from running to fighting to massaging to anything. So the flat shape is defined by the fact that it distributes equally, say, water coming from the sky over a wide area. Concave shape will concentrate it towards the lowest point. If it's a square shape, then the lowest point will be a plane. But if it's like a valley system, or if it's like a mountain torrent, very, very hollow, then it will pressurize more at the lower part. Same would apply here. A contundent blunt weapon will distribute force over a flat surface. That's the use of a systema punch, for instance. The entire idea is not to concentrate power so that you can strike partners or opponents without creating too much damage, both to your system and to theirs. If you create say a knuckle punch or a finger strike, or you use a sharp needle or a knife, it's exactly the reverse. A sharp needle is like the extreme shape of convex. Very little width, very easy to go in between things and get the wedge effect. At the same time, since it has no width, it has no support, so it's easy to break. If any direction goes sideways, it's very easy to bend or break. So there's always this balance between what you get from one shape and what you lose. If you do finger strikes or whatnot, it's a lot of penetrating power, very concentrated targets, but at the same time very little resistance. If anything goes wrong, you lose all that. Same if you go for massage. If you try to spread the pressure, you use the full palm or you use a wide area of the body, and then you'd spread the pressure equally over as wide a surface as you can. The opposite would be you want to get a sharper and sharper point. You get more penetrating power if you go at 90 degrees angle. So that will be it for now. Let's summarize again. Basic principle: red, receive, emit, deflect. And from this red acronym we can get a couple of other acronyms if we use a similar ID to the one used by Edouard de Bonneau for mental practices, like using the mind as tool. If we use the body as tool, we can develop a literacy of very basic principles the same way, and they can be applied then to a wide area of practices. So red would give birth as subcategories to a thud, for instance, for direction density. And these as subcategories of thought, you'd have CP for the old people still knowing the way you write in Cyrillics the USSR acronyms. So CCCP would be concave, convex, complex, and flat. What I call complex here would be any shape that's a mix of hollows, flat, and convex. Another one would be Placost. So Placost would be an acronym describing the evolution of the basic alphabet of shapes from points to lines to arcs to circles to, so now in English you'd have to change the acronym to figure eight, infinity circles, and to waves. Obviously you get a few changes to make to the acronym in English, which I haven't done, so still. The spirals and torques being double spirals. Any of these movements can be doubled. So a point is doubled, is differentiated from itself through all the processes you could find in secret geometry, or like the point is spreading out in all directions, gives a circle which splits, gives two circles meeting each other at the center, then separating, creating 2 points. These 2 points create a relationship, and you can join them by an infinity of other points. Differentiate one if they stick together, and then you have another one and another one and another one. This continuous series of points will give you a line, and the line can be shaped many different ways. But the first would be, for our purpose, the first is a straight line, and then it goes into curved lines, single curved, and these curved lines would be called arcs. And then if you take 2 arcs, you put them one after the other. So this way they complement each other to create this convex shape. The other way they complement each other to create the concave shape. So now if I reverse this symmetry, I got the first wave, cine wave, and if I cover both, I got the first ellipsoid shape, which will at one point become a circle, as much as I can draw a circle with my hands. These circles can double too and create the infinity shape of the 8. The 8 can be doubled, and then you go into all the braiding patterns and whatnot. Meanwhile, if we keep going with the cine waves, you double it, you start to get the harmonics, like half the height, half the width, and then all the harmonics of the harmonic, like basically what we call harmonics, halving at each time. And from there, if you double, so when I started to do undulations, I do them in 2 dimensions. So I create, the full story of this would be you want to join 2 villages. The straightest way to do it is a straight line, but at the same time it contains the least amount of energy and information. You can store the least amount of cars and people, and you have the least amount of diversity of landscape. of our information. It's always relative, because if you go beyond, if you change scales, the amount of information and the amount of space in between both is, in fractals, it's infinite. But if you do not change scale, and you take the scale of cars, for instance, the straight shape in between two fixed points will contain the least amount, and then you start to curve it, you increase the ability to store energy, you increase the amount of information around, at the same time as you make it slower to reach. The more distance, the slower it is. So this is not changing any other parameter, not including slopes and whatnot. So when I have linked my two cities like this, I can double the lanes if I want to put more people. I can double the curves, like creating an ellipsoid. I can organize the flow, which we'll see later. But for now, if I can start to create curves into my path, double the curve, then triple, then quadruple, and the more bends I have, the more total. If I use a string to actually do this between two objects, you'll see that although the actual space in between has not changed, the amount of thread that will be used to link them will increase. Past the point when I have made these tiny ups and downs, changing the frequency of the curves, the next way to actually increase the amount of energy and storage that I can have and information will be to go from two-dimensional to three-dimensional. So going three-dimensional, I create curves sideways, but up and down also. So I'll go up a hill, down a valley, up a hill, down a valley. So this is as far as the analogy holds, because the most structured aspect of this will be quite difficult to make for a road. It's a spiral. And the tighter the spiral gets, like a corkscrew, getting closer and closer to the center, the more information it will hold. And the next pattern that will allow for an increase in potential energy would be a double spiral, which we do all the time. Like if you're trying to open, you can try to open like a pot of jam, and you can do it by fixing one side and then twisting the other to follow the shape of the screw inside, like the screw pattern inside. But very fast you'll do a double twisting motion. So this one would be lateral, because obviously since the actual shape is made to increase friction, you cannot increase the distance without increasing the friction. But you'd still find the same principles in other applications, more specialized, and you'll find it in the use of the body. Like if you do a linear movement of a distance, it will have less power than an arching movement, up or down, or sideways, which will have less power than a first wave. Make it very big, but obviously it can be made. So same, it can go up, down, or down, up, down, or sideways, or it can start to spiral. So when you start to spiral over the same gap between two objects, it will take longer to arrive, but it can store more inertia, add more energy. And when you get to screwing motions, spirals, so one joint twist one way and all the other joints twist in the same way, this will create much more power, and you can recruit more joints. So the more joints you recruit, if you recruit all the joints of the body, it becomes very strong. And to finish, if you do a torque, say the wrist will go one way and the elbow will go another. So this gives, it's very used in Bagua or many martial arts. That's a topic for potentially next time. So thanks for watching.